And so begins the month of creative bankruptcy with Spooktober Fright Fest thing. Everybody's doing it. It's the second time I've done this. The first one was a couple of years ago in a different language, and it made even less sense then. The whole horror things in October because of Halloween is not really something you find in my neck of the woods. It's something that we do on the internet though, because well, it's popular overseas and that's where a lot of the clicks come from, and that's sort of what the internet becomes for a month, so why not join the bandwagon? So here we are with The Uninvited. I had planned on making this show today since January, so it's planned very far in advance. So far that I had no idea there was gonna be a re-release of the game, if you will, on Steam right now. Sadly, it's not what you would call the best version of the game that's been re-released. And the one you're gonna be seeing mostly on the background is the worst one of them all. It's the DOS version. There is a Windows version out there. It is freely available on Abandonia, and it's a 16-bit executable. I had played it. It was very nice when I had Windows XP on a previous computer, but these days it doesn't run so well. So the footage on the background may be a bit As for the audio, well, the DOS version cannot do audio and animation at the same time, or audio and you being able to do something, or at least move the mouse simultaneously, so I thought I would spare you the PC speaker shrieks of doom and instead replace them with probably some copyright-free music that YouTube will identify as the property of Sony and then send me to jail. So what is The Uninvited? Well, it is, in my opinion, a really great horror game. Now, bear in mind, I say this in the context of when it was made. It was made in 1986. This was when we were getting titles like Castlevania, the first one, and Starflight actually. Should probably do a show about that one as well. It was the year when we got The Legend of Zelda and Metroid, and you've probably seen the 1986 game. If not, please take a look at it. I explain in more detail about the situation of games back then, unless it was one of the years where I forgot to mention some games. What I want to get at is that back then, the games that we had on computers were not really necessarily all into this new whole craze called a graphical interface driven by a mouse. It was sort of a novelty, even though we already had on the market several devices that used a mouse. The Macintosh was one of them, the Atari ST was another one, and of course the Amiga. They all had mice attached to them, but games were still not really on that level yet. And when they weren't what you would call necessarily super adept at using one. And along came a studio called ICOM Simulations and created a couple of games that were pretty much built from the ground up to use a mouse and an interface that was tailor-made for the mouse, with ideas like windows that you could use to show the inventory of a character and the locations, the map. You could even click on them, and I think I may be remembering wrong, but I believe they may have been resizable. Again, don't take my word on this. I'm mostly basing it on the versions that I play. I never played the original Mac version, I think. Actually, I may have played it. I played a black and white version of it on Windows once. I think that may have been a direct port of the Mac version instead of the Windows version. And I think that one may have had some sort of resizable window, but that's besides the point. The main idea is that the interface was fantastic. It's akin to what I always say about Morrowind having the best interface of its series. The games made by ICOM Simulations, which started out with Deja Vu the year before, that was an adventure game where you're playing as a police officer, then followed up with Uninvited and then Shadowgate, they were all using the same kind of interface. And it was pretty much kind of the best you could find for an adventure game back then. And in some ways it's still kind of this, because it's one of the least fiddly interfaces, even though it does have that bar with the the verbs that you can use. It still has some concepts like you can double click on a thing and it will have a default action there. Technologically, I was impressed by this game when I first saw it, and mind you, I played it kinda late, and I mean, boy, it was 20 years old by that point. And even so, it was as playable as any it was more playable than many adventure games in the past couple of years, because we're at that time when adventure games started to drop mouse support in favor of wasting your time and making fun of you for buying them, believing you could use a mouse to play them. Oh ho ho, silly you. Now sure, some people may argue that because you're constantly seeing the interface, you're not as drawn into the game. I wouldn't say that's a valid criticism. It's not at all, especially since, well, The Uninvited did a really good job then, and it did a really good job even when I played it to draw you into its world. I still have very vivid memories of finding out what the character with the dress and the umbrella was that showed up in a hallway, just walking out of a room in a seemingly deserted manner. You've probably seen the bit on the background by now at least twice. They haven't gotten very far into the game actually, so that may be why it's repeating. The save game function wasn't really working, so I didn't really dabble much to get it to work. So I had to restart the game a couple of times. What I mean to say is that it was an effective game at what it did. At its attempt to create a tense sense of atmosphere, a bit of horror and dreaded something maybe being out there trying to get you to murder you. It did so in multiple ways, not just with the jump scares like that thing with a skeleton, but also because there was a time limit on the game. And the more time passed, the more warnings the game gave you that you were not in control of your own character anymore. There was something driving at your brain, something trying to claw its way in and take over completely. And when it happened, you would lose. But before you got to that point, you would wake up in basically the beginning of Silent Hill. You just crashed your car, your brother/sister is missing, depending on what version of the game you're playing. The closest thing you can find to you is an old manor, and you suspect that your sibling may be somewhere in there. So you go in, the door slams behind you, and you venture forth, trying to find out exactly what is happening through a series of puzzles, a lot of puzzles, some exploration, and more puzzles, and a labyrinth, because I'm starting to agree with the people that say that the labyrinths are the laziest and cheapest form of puzzle you can ever put in a video game. Also, the puzzles per se of the game were not what you would call maybe the most straightforward ones, because I don't think this is much of a spoiler, probably that demon's already gone past the screen a couple of times. There's a hint of the supernatural in the game. There are spells, there's magic, there are things that are not made to make sense. So solving a puzzle logically sometimes does not actually work because it involves things beyond your simple human perception. So you have to dig and find journals and hints and clues and things around the world to help you achieve your goal of solving a couple of puzzles and getting your sibling out there before you both become zombies. It isn't what you would call maybe the greatest adventure game ever made in terms of its plot or its characters. You never talk to anybody, there's just puzzles, and you mostly get the story out of diaries. You find out about a wizard and apprentices and backstabbing and summonings and stuff. It's not even at the same level as Maniac Mansion, I would say, which came out a year later. Technologically, Maniac Mansion was, I feel, not as user-friendly, with the interface. Especially since this one had actual icons for items, not just words. You actually saw the pre-presentation that they had. But in terms of structure and story and characters, Maniac Mansion was kind of better. But they did share that same idea of non-linearity, since you were able to go through the game in multiple different ways. Well, you could go through the same way, but not in the same order always. You could also sort of crack your head open on a battle axe when you try to use it on yourself. You could try to use a lot of things on yourself. A lot of useless things because the game was filled with items that were just plain pointless, something that didn't really help with the vagueness of some puzzles. But a walkthrough will deal with a lot of these things if you're just in it for the experience of traversing a kind of well-built scene in terms of atmosphere, in terms of being the right amount of creepy, with pentagrams all over the place. So I think, was that actually changed to something else in the NES version? Yes, they changed the pentagram to a star. Also, the NES version was one of the worst ones. I would have loved to have given you footage of the nice versions, but, well, that would have meant a bit more work on my part than I can invest right now. But take my word when I say that there are better versions of the game than this one. Much, much better versions. And you can find them if you're willing to do some, probably VirtualBox emulation of a Windows 3.1 system or Windows 95 or pretty much anything with 32-bit compatibility. And I mean 32-bit OS that has 16-bit compatibility, which will let you play the Windows version. You could probably emulate the Amiga version as well. I think that one is good as well. I'm not saying you should go out and play the game because, well, if you're a fan of the horror adventure genre, there's probably not a lot you'll find here that you haven't seen already done a bunch of times in pretty much every other game of this genre. Done much better. You're probably better rewarded for the time invested if you go out and play Silent Hill instead of this one. But for the sake of trying to see what was going on in the adventure game, the horror adventure game space in 1986, it's really not that bad of a game. It's well made, it looks good. If you don't play it on DOS or in the NES version that was ported to PC on Steam, is a definitive something or other, which is kind of bleh, you may actually find it to be nice-ish enough. And it was kind of influential on a lot of games of the coming years. As I said before, Silent Hill basically begins the exact same way, with your character waking up in a car crash and having their family member, which is a small child in this version, vanished, and you have to find them. It's the same setup. It's far from being as fulfilling or as gripping as Silent Hill, but hey, it was 1986, what do you expect? It's no Ultima. But for what it was, well, Uninvited, I would say, is one of those tiny gems of yesteryear that probably should not be forgotten. Icon Simulations went belly up 20 years ago, but actually looking now on Steam, the games are still for sale, and I don't mean just the 8-bit adventure anthology Disaster that was developed and published by Abstraction Games and General Arcade. I mean the originals, the Mac versions of the game. A studio called Zojoi actually still sells the Uninvited on Steam for the price of just €3. I could have actually made a proper video of this had I actually searched for the game there. Whoops. So who knows, there may be some hope of it getting a remaster or a remake one day, since they've already done something similar with Shadowgate. Shadowgate does have a modernized version that was released 4 years ago, so maybe there is hope for the Uninvited as well. God knows you should not be playing the DOS version. It is just simply horrible looking compared to pretty much all the other ones. Well, that'll be it for the Uninvited. Come back next time when we will talk about a brand new subject of horror and terror on a platform that I haven't really covered much games from, have I? Next week is Project Firestart. Goodbye.